Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the Introduction to Machine Learning workshop for the DSGT Udemy Bootcamp. It's such a pleasure to have you today. So in the previous video, we've introduced the idea of sklearn, and we've used it for doing our train test split on our data set. So we've defined what a train and test set is and why it's important for machine learning models. And we've also done some elementary preprocessing of the Titanic data set for demonstration purposes. So we have our X train, X test, Y train, and Y test, right? But what we want to do is we want to do some extra transformations on the X train and the X test. So what we want to do is we want to do what's called standard scalar, and we want to essentially standardize the data set such that each column has mean 0 and variance 1. So essentially we're kind of normalizing our data set in a way. And the reason why we normalize is typically to kind of reduce the bias. We don't want one column to have a unfair influence on another column, and we want to essentially kind of compare apples to apples. It makes our analysis relatively unbiased. So let's run this. So one thing that's really important is when we're doing our scalar, we want to fit only on the training data and apply the transformations, right? But in our X test, to make sure that we're doing same transformations for our, X train and X test, we want to just apply the same transformation you did, like to X train to X test, to make sure that we're doing an apples to apples analysis. So here's our standardized version of the X train. So recall that these numbers are, standard normalized values, and our X train were definitely not numbers between 0 and 1, right? So let's take the shape of X train, right? You'll notice that our X train is 569 by 10, and that's the same shape. So the standard scalar does retain the dimensions. It's just performing a normalization. So what do we do from here, right? So in the previous video, we've talked about dimensionality reduction and how when you have a lot of dimensions, there's a lot of computational overhead. So dimension reduction is important because you want to make sure that we don't have computational overhead when we're storing our data set, and we want to kind of do things in an efficient way. So one way of doing this is using a technique called PCA, right? So PCA is a dimensionality reduction technique where you can take data from high dimension and project it into lower dimensional space. And the way PCA works is you want to essentially maximize the variance of each dimension, right? That way you're kind of capturing the data in the best way possible. So if you look at this data set, imagine you have 2 dimensions, right? And you're plotting these data points right here, showing these circles. So we want to kind of find the axes which best maximize the spread, right? And you'll see intuitively, right? There's a lot of spread among this axis here, right? If we go like this and axis like this, right? So we want to essentially take the top k, axes which have the maximum variance, right? So this is an example of the top 2 directions in which the variance is maximized, right? So that's what PCA is intuitively, right? So this is our Y train, just to take a look at it. And we're going to actually apply PCA, and we're going to use 2 components, right? So we're going to take our X train data and identify the 2 directions in which the variance is maximized, and basically get those directions out, right? So we're going to instantiate a PCA object, fit it on X train, and then to get our X train and X test, we're going to apply a transformation using this fitted PCA entity, right? So you get the principal components for the X train and the X test. And this code right here is going to plot what those principal components look like. So what is the data like in relative to the PCA axes, right? So that's what a projection is, right? We're kind of changing from one axis to another axis. And this is the result of what PCA did, right, to our data set. This is our train data and our test data. And essentially, this is what dimension reduction is doing at an intuitive level. And PCA is one of many techniques. There's also things like LDA that you can use. You just have to play around with the scikit-learn documentation. So in the next video, we're going to be introducing machine learning models as what they are and kind of go through a survey of them. Till then, see you in the next video.